Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video is going to cover episode 4, parts 14 through 16, because 15 and 16 are basically one part of a giant scene, and also a lot of it is action, so I will probably not be going in depth on a lot of what happens there. This video will contain complete spoilers for the entirety of the game, so if you don't know how it goes, I wouldn't recommend watching, because it wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So in this section, we first do a brief interlude of returning to Anji of the future as she goes through and investigates further about the circumstances around the Rokkenjima Island. I like this section for fleshing out some of the non-Ushiromiya characters who don't really get as much spotlight, and showing a bit about their life outside of Rokkenjima and what kind of motivations they might have. There's an interesting note for motivation purposes, where Kumasawa is referenced as having tried to solve the epitaph and having pretty in-depth notes, that to me feels like a hint to the idea that she would be interested in money. Not necessarily in the same way that the Ushiromiya siblings have a specific and urgent need of money, but she could use the money and she would like it. And so she could very easily become an accomplice to something if she was being paid for it. One thing I think is an interesting note is that when talking to Nanjo's son, Anji has to kind of point out and highlight how personally invested she is in this story to underline the fact that he's not just talking to a reporter. But the particular thing I enjoy about that is that Nanjo's son was basically on a tirade of an almost rehearsed speech he has presumably had to give many times, and it's just the way in which he is so used to that being his version of events, where he is an aggrieved party, he is the victim, he shouldn't have to rake over these details. All the people asking him to do so are just self-interested parties looking to make a quick buck. He has to actually re-examine his relationship to this situation because he's talking to someone who was a child when it happened and has had to live with it for 12 years in a way he has not. He has certainly been a victim of the incident, but he is not on Anji's level. And so I just like the way in which Anji's presence forces him to recontextualize that in a way that people often do have their specific truth about events and don't think about the fact that that truth does need to be recontextualized based on who they're telling it to. And that doesn't make the original truth wrong, it just means that you need to make sure the truth is still true for the person you are talking to. We also get some details about how the money motivation would have been distributed. We see the various extended family members being given this delivery of items. One clue I enjoy in this is that the letter does contain the numbers that we saw in episode 3, and in retrospect, I think someone may have pointed this out at the time, but just more concretely I'm aware of it now. You can't get the money simply with a number, you also need to have a card and a key, so that number could only be for someone who was already primed to collect their share. Which, again, is because an accomplice needs to be clued in. They can't simply be drafted without their knowledge. They have to know that there is a reward in some sense coming. One thing that is curious about the money and the reward that gets sent out is that multiple people did receive this, and everyone at least claims or acts as if they have not made any use of this. Anji got the letter and just forgot about it, never thought about it and didn't investigate. It probably exists somewhere. Nanjo's son claims that because it was dirty money, he refused it, which does seem to be likely because there's a reference to Nanjo having a sick grandchild, which is certainly a reason you might have motivation to get this money, and if I'm remembering right, there's a brief mention of that child having not pulled through, which does feel like an indication that either the money was not used or was no help, that it did not ultimately benefit them. Likewise, Kumasawa's son has not really thought about it or used the money or really investigated it. They were just like, this is weird, and they didn't do anything with it. The thing that this connects to for me is that Beatrice used a very uncertain method of delivering this payment. She used what's almost a game of getting undeliverable mail to be returned to sender. As pointed out, she could have been caught because of this, because if it came... There was a very slight chance she could get caught over this, because it has such strange conditions that if it came before the family conference... For instance, if Nanjo's son got it before the family conference, an alarm of sorts could have been raised quite easily. I don't know to what extent any accomplices knew about the plan before the family conference, but it's very possible that they were only supposed to learn at the time, aside from Genji, presumably. But the specific thing to me that feels very fitting is that the method functioned perfectly, and yet the reward remained undelivered, because the mysterious and weird air about the money was enough to basically prevent people from accessing and taking advantage of it. Different people engaged with it to different extents. Anji thought it was a prank. It just hurt her in a moment where she was emotionally vulnerable. But not one of them got any benefit out of this. The thing the accomplices ultimately wanted, nothing came of it. And Kumasawa's children are still just hardworking fishermen, just like her, who worked all her life. Presumably the thing she wanted was to give some more comfort, allow her family to not have to toil the way she did until her old age. And they just didn't even occur to them to investigate this. I don't know if there's anything very particular about the way in which Beatrice was throwing this up to chance. I kind of read it as almost if this does get me caught, well then, it's a roll of the dice, it's a spin of the roulette wheel. If I get caught before the game starts, then that's proof that the game's not meant to be. That feels very fatalistic in a way that fits Beatrice's state of mind in this moment. Especially with when we get to episode 7, I have a strong feeling that Beatrice was not necessarily even on board with her own plan when the real family conference happened, in a way where this might also be begging to get caught. There's kind of a big trope of criminals returning to the scene of the crime, and that's often deployed as if they're kind of arrogant and love to gloat. This is a case where Beatrice is trying to get caught before the crime even happened, almost as if she's providing opportunities to fail. And we know that magic only works when there is a degree of risk. The greater the risk, the greater the rewards. But the risk also obviously introduces the possibility for the magic to not happen in the first place. We will have a lot to say about Beatrice and her motivations and intentions in the next episode, but there's just this fun little morsel in there. Also, in the boat captain section, there's a very funny moment where Anji stops and is like, wait, what's that thing? It's kind of funny to me how coy it plays with the reveal in this moment, but having now finished the game, going back through this, I think it does fit better in the same way that episode 7 never directly outs Beatrice. This moment presumably is about the origins of Sakutaro and the fact that there is another vessel to use to resurrect Sakutaro. And it's a little funny how coy it plays, because it ends up making it sound like it's a much bigger deal, in a way where especially I did not play this anywhere near release, but I could easily imagine people making much more outsized theories about what this might be if they didn't pick up the hints that Ryukishi was trying to put down. It ends up making it feel a little bit obtuse in a funny way. But I do like it as a clear moment of Anji being able to understand the real material ways in which this kind of white magic, as it will soon be referred to, works, where in the most cynical way you can obviously describe it as lies, or you can simply describe it as manipulations, like certain versions of events. There's a range of cynical ways you can put this, but it is undeniable what material good it did for Maria to have a stuffed animal handmade by her mother, purpose made for Maria, filled with her mother's love, and why it's both materially good that Maria had that, and the idea that you could resurrect this with a physical new vessel would also be massively materially beneficial to Maria. And you could cynically call this lying, you could cynically call this tricking a child, but the intent and the value of what it would do vastly outweighs any kind of dedication to conceptual truth than anything like that. It vastly outweighs any kind of dedication to truth as a concept for the sake of truth as a concept. Anji is a character who desperately needed to learn that lesson, and so having that lesson in this moment is a good turning point for her character, especially as we lead up to her climax of her future story. And then we move on to the tests. So the tests are exceedingly long action scenes. As noted in the actual Let's Play videos, I had to split up the whole section because of how long it got. A bit behind the curtain, the way I normally do these videos is I will tend to skim through the actual script to refresh my memory on what happened in these sections and kind of pick through and like notice the lines that really stand out as meaning specific things or indicating this or that. I'm not going to do that as much with the massive section this is. I will be talking a little bit more of just a general overview of, again, what these magical narrative scenes offer, what they're doing, and particularly in this section thinking a little bit more again about the author of this episode and what they are doing. So with the test, there's a pretty clear idea of what the test itself is supposed to be. The idea that you cannot have all three of the options. You either lose yourself, you lose the one you love, or you lose the rest of the family. On its face, pretty straightforward. In practice, this is a very real concern for Beatrice, for Shannon, for Canon, because there is materially, at least in their vision of the future, there's materially no way that they can have all of these. Obviously, I could make an argument about all of those people getting to exist and a complex but functional relationship existing out of that, but it's probably not going to work in the Ushiromiya family. But what's interesting is that the test is also reflective of Kinzo, because again, this episode has the Beatrice piece being the Kinzo piece effectively, where he is projecting his own understanding of the world, his own ideas. He clearly has a correct answer to the test, which does not strictly speaking mean he expects everyone else to give that same answer, but he has a notion of what the test should prove and how you should come out of that test. Because as Kinzo indicates clearly, he chose the kill everyone else option, both because he did that back in the army time, and he pretty much does that for the sake of spinning the roulette again. But this also does feel like the choice Beatrice is making by doing this entire murder game. Regardless of which of the Ushiromiya siblings she ends up with, she is choosing the option of kill everyone else, because to Beatrice, there is no version of having the one she loves, as well as the rest of the family getting to exist. She needs the clean slate. And she is also pretty quick to jump to the getting rid of herself option, or getting rid of the one she loves. Because Beatrice is also deeply insecure about getting the one she loves to actually accept and be with her. Which again, we'll be talking about next time. Specifically with George and Jessica, I find George's answer pretty straightforward from where his character began and where his character was going. He, as he says, was willing to fight his family for the sake of Shannon. Shannon is endeared by this, and the magical narrative we are being shown in this section pretty clearly shows both Shannon and Cannon getting motivational, romantic speeches that push them to fight for their loved ones, and that have the adults going, oh wow, they love you so much. But it's also not hard to know how Shannon is concerned that even with George being willing to fight his whole family, she's not sure he will be happy with her, what she can be to him wanting to have a whole big family. And especially with the way George fights in this section, I kind of read, again, there's clearly a over-dramatized notion of George being so stoic, he takes all the hits and then he fights back. If you think pragmatically about what George would be like with his family, I honestly don't believe he would fight his family nearly as much as he wishes he could. He has spent his whole life doing what his mother told him and wanted. He even in the fight scene indicates that he's learned all these fighting techniques because his mother sent him to different classes and was fickle about which one he should do. He has been following the script for so long. He has the romantic notions of fighting his family, and I think it is not untrue that he wants to do it, but I don't think he is actually prepared for the realities of it. And he fails in this section, as does Jessica. So from the Jessica end, she's willing to self-sacrifice on paper. She is ready to give up herself because she can't either... Because she is not willing to kill her family for the sake of the one she loves, but also can't live with killing the one she loves. She just can't bring herself to take other people's lives for her own sake, and so is instead suggesting that she would give up her own for them. But then, of course, doesn't do that. She fights back, and obviously this makes sense. Why would you go along with this test, and so forth and so on? And she spins it in this idea of wanting to live up to the ideal she professed that Cannon should, of fighting for the life he wants, making the most of the life he has, not just laying down and let life pass him by. But again, with George, if you think about it from the flip side of these things, is this section effectively saying that while on paper Jessica makes the choice to self-sacrifice, she has not actually given up anything for Cannon. And as much as she will give him these pep talks of wanting to do this for him, wanting him to be the full person, and wanting him to be a full person and seize the life he wants, whether it's with her or not, again, she may not be prepared for the reality of what that life would be and what it would be like, especially as someone who expects to become the family head, if nothing was to change in the future. She has a particular life set out ahead of her. Not in the same way George does, but she still has certain expectations and plans that will be thrust upon her. And as much as she already chafes at those, her way of getting around those is by doing them out of her parents' sight at school, and just not having to ever cross those boundaries. That's not something she can do when it comes to being with the one she loves. This whole section mirrors the love game that Battler is going to set up in episode 6, which I enjoyed that a lot at the time, as I was still not quite getting what the deal with Beatrice was. But I look forward to seeing that in contrast now, having replayed this section, and wondering and wondering how that section goes out, and wondering how that section goes, because I think overall in the magical narrative of this section, it feels very optimistic. Up until everyone loses, this whole section is about the power of love, the power of how they can bust through all these barriers together, they will connect and sync up, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of very optimistic, in that sense, fighting happening, and they get through all of these things, and I think it's cynically undercut in the end, as everyone dies. Literally everyone dies. The two siblings end up killing each other, which again is appropriate for the limitations upon Shannon and Canon and being able to pursue the life that they want. It does make me wonder if, by contrast, Battler's love game will actually be more optimistic. Is that going to be a love game where it will be realistic about the limitations placed upon these people and the lives they could lead, but is still willing to accept and acknowledge the love? It's notable that, as of yet, Canon has not told his quote-unquote real name to Jessica. And again, I think I said long ago, I think that's an indication that Canon has not picked a real name, because he has not had to. But there is still a degree of closeness that has not been reached, which I honestly think might happen in episode 6 and not even next episode. But when it happens, we'll talk about it. And of course, the other part of the whole magical narrative that we're talking about here, the way in which I say it's optimistic in one sense, despite everyone dying in the end, undercutting everything, I think a major part of this too is that this is all set dressing for Battler. Everything that they are doing is a preamble to him meeting Beatrice. They engineer things in such a way that they get Kyrie on the phone to be like, oh no, I'm going to die any moment, everybody's dead, I'm the only one left and I have moments. No matter what, believe in magic, just believe in magic. You just gotta, no matter what you see, no matter what people say, believe the shit that's in front of you. The desperation in that is heartbreaking, because this is the first time, and perhaps only time on the game board, where Beatrice is directly appearing to Battler, and not appearing to Battler, say, at a distance very briefly. She appeared in front of Kyrie before, but that was at quite a distance, and it was very brief interaction, and it was without Kyrie having known the servants very well, for instance. So it would be pretty easy for Kyrie to not quite recognize a face. This is someone who ostensibly knows Shannon pretty intimately, even if it was 6 years ago, and should be more personally invested in that relationship in particular. And Beatrice is here basically trying to ensure that she will be accepted as who she is. Which, again, we will get to how this goes, but she is not prepared for other things in that encounter. And of course, the other angle on that is, despite all of that, Battler is still pretty much like, no, magic's not real. What are you talking about? Which, listen, I understand. If I was in Battler's situation and really thought my family was all being killed, and in fact did have some proof soon that his family was being killed, I would probably be like, why are you trying to convince me magic is real? What the hell is going on? I believe in the magic in Umineko, but if I was living on Rakajima, I would probably have some different priorities and thoughts going on in my head. But even so, the fact that he does still stubbornly refuse magic feels again a bit like a limitation of the coercions that Beatrice can use. Beatrice is literally killing people and fake killing people. We'll have to get to the whodunit stuff in the post-game. But she has set Battler up to have so many people killed, and people are using their final moments to beg him to do something, and Battler's just not quite doing it. He is a far too stubborn boy for his own good and for the good of everyone else around him. And that tees us up for next time, when I will be discussing Beatrice and Battler's face-to-face conversation. We may go an episode that may cover 2 videos. It might end up just having to be about that section. We'll see how long I ramble. But until then, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.